to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Vint Cerf. I have to say, we were very excited when he accepted to be our keynote speaker. He's been our supporter and sponsor for this event. Most of you attending here and other friends who could not attend really were inspired with this opportunity to be able to hear him speak. When I called my friends in Texas who really wanted to come but were unable to join, the husband is a journalist, the wife is an engineer, but more on fuel cells. I was talking to her and asking her to help me promote this event. You need to let people know because Vint Cerf is going to be coming. He's the keynote speaker. So she said, well, who is Vint Cerf? And the husband said, oh my God, you don't know Vint Cerf? And she says, no, I don't. Who is he? And he says, let me just give you an analogy. Let's say you're getting baptized and Jesus comes to your baptism. That's the best analogy I can give you. So, so I'm very honored. The San Francisco Bay Area chapter is very honored to have Dr. Vint Cerf as our keynote speaker today. And just a brief introduction. Vint Cerf is widely recognized as one of the fathers of the internet for his work on the design of the TCP/IP protocols and the architecture of the internet. He also serves as the vice president and chief internet evangelist at Google and has been doing that since 2005. He was chairman of the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers from 2000 to 2007. He is currently also president of the Association of Computing Machinery. Mr. Cerf is also the former senior vice president of technology, strategy, and architecture and technology for MCI. While working with MCI, Mr. Cerf led the engineering of MCI Mail, the first commercial mail service to be connected to the internet. He currently serves on several boards and has received numerous awards for his continuously pioneering work. Dr. Cerf holds a Bachelor in Science degree in mathematics from Stanford University and a Master's in Science and PhD degrees in computer science from UCLA and holds 21 honorary degrees from universities around the world. We're researching to get to know more about Vint Cerf, and because I'm always impressed and honored. I've seen him in various conferences, and he's always very humble, very supportive, dedicated, works tirelessly for what he believes in, and that is that the internet should be there for everyone. I came across this quote which really describes what he feels about the internet society and the relationship and how we should conduct ourselves as a society. The internet society is operating on a world stage to help all of the stakeholders of the internet to understand what the implications of the technology are, what policies are beneficial, and what rights and freedoms need to be preserved in the use of this system. We are honored that we have a spokesperson, a pioneer, an evangelist that stands up for us and has been doing that since he created the Internet Society in 1992 to this day. Welcome, Dr. Vint Cerf.
Well, first of all, I have to admit that Karen has given my speech because it looks to me like everything I would say Karen's already said, so I may have to pick a few other things to bring up, and then you'll have a longer coffee break. So maybe there wasn't really an error in the program. I really only need about 10 minutes. But I did want to draw your attention to a historical fact. At Stanford University, at the Stanford AI Laboratory, there was also a computer-controlled vending machine called the Prancing Pony. And it knew how old you were. also, and so it wouldn't open any of the things that had alcohol in them unless unless it knew you were the right age. There was a guy that worked at the Hunan restaurant down at the Stanford Shopping Center, and he would run down and bring, fresh Chinese food to put into the little vending machine, and that was in the 1970s. One other thing I wanted to observe is that the idea that you can casually connect things to the internet because there are chipsets available is really an important driver. I listened to people trying to design and build devices that we would include in this category of Internet of Things. And there is very little attention paid to how are we going to hook this up to the net, because it's assumed that you can just do that. You have Wi-Fi available, or 802.15.4, or some other LTE, and so on. And so this casual assumption, I think, leads to potentially a massive proliferation of devices, for one thing, but it also tells you that we're in a very different world than we were 40 years ago or 30 years ago when the internet was turned on. I think I wanted to make one other observation. Recently, it was drawn to my attention that a company called John Deere, which makes tractors and other kinds of farm equipment, has made the assertion that you don't own the tractor that you purchased, because there's software on this tractor which is owned by John Deere, and it's their intellectual property, and you don't have the right to resell the intellectual property. Well, just which intellectual property is this? It's the software that runs the MP3 player inside the cab of the John Deere. Now, I may have misstated this, so please double check the facts, but the assertion that there is software on board and therefore the normal right of resale of the equipment is abrogated worries me a lot, because in some sense every device that qualifies as part of the Internet of Things has software on board, and claims of ownership and the like, and your limited right to do something with the device that you thought you purchased worries me a lot. And so I think these are spaces which may be more serious than the technological ones that we largely focus on today. So I do have a prepared talk. We'll have to find out whether there's anything beyond what Karen's already brought up. I want to draw your attention to this picture, because this is sort of what we imagine the typical living room might look like in 2020. But what I want you to notice is that there are not a whole lot of screens and keyboards and mice and other kinds of things in order to control the devices in this scene. And so one of the things in the back of our minds about this world is that our interaction with these devices has to be something better than your mobile with a keyboard. And so I think our expectation that these devices will be more like communicating with other people could turn out to be a very important element of this IoT environment. We're clearly not there yet, as we will see in a moment. One thing that's fair to say is that the Internet of Things is already here. There are a lot of devices that we would classify as part of this space, things like the Nest thermostat, for example. They span from the individual things that we wear, like a Fitbit, for example, to things that involve a broader scope, like driving your bicycle or your car around. We even have notions of smart cities, maybe even smart countries, or smart continents, or even a smart planet, in the sense that we're paying attention to the environment, we're worried about climate change, we're sensing and trying to gather information about what's going on a global scale. All of that is spanned by this concept of Internet of Things. And you can see how these things vary over different conceptual spaces, whether it's active engagement in the city or in the places where we live, or our own health care, education, I like some of the things that are starting to happen. You all have experienced the virtual reality sorts of things, either the ones where you use Google Cardboard, where you hold up your mobile and you watch a 3D movie, and as you move around, you see something different. There's a company called Magic Leap, which we've been involved with at Google, and they apparently have the ability to show what look like 3D objects that are, sort of in your neighborhood. So this world is going to be quite different when it comes to entertainment. However, Karen's pointed out, everybody's really worried about the potential hazards of having all this software in all these devices surrounding us everywhere. And so these are the kinds of attitudes that we may encounter on the left-hand side of this chart, and hoping to transform the worries into the right-hand side. So we want to get from it's a bunch of gadgets to they're just embedded in our fabric of life. From it's not secure to I'm in control. It's just a gimmick and it won't last, which is what a lot of people said about the internet, by the way. So we might hope that this won't be just a bunch of gimmicks, and hope that it will turn out to be a positive experience. Some people will say it's really complicated, and we're going to say that to ourselves, I think, during the course of the day. Somehow we have to make it come out that it isn't complicated, that it's easy, that systems can be configured easily. I worry about the standard scenario where you got 100 devices at home, and you are moving. So you pack up the 100 devices, and you move to a new house, and it has 100 devices in it. And so now you have 200 devices that have to be configured, and none of us wants to spend the entire day typing IPv6 addresses into some kind of a configuration program. And to make matters worse, you don't want to accidentally go into configuration mode and configure your neighbor's stuff into your system. Or when you're in configuration mode, you don't want the 15-year-old next door to notice that and configure your entertainment system into his system. So there are a whole lot of issues here having to do with scaling and having to do with management and configuration. So let's just take a really simple example. I mean, what models or use cases might we use to sort of help ourselves think about what are we doing here? So let's take a very simple washing machine. Its main job is washing clothes. And there isn't a whole lot of customization, although a typical washing machine today has a whole bunch of dials and it probably has some software in it to help it do the right thing, except that you have to figure out, what all the right settings are in order to do the washing. So imagine that you allow the washing machine to be connected to the rest of the world, in particular to the network. And now you have a washing machine that might be able to get information from outside. It might be able to learn how to configure itself. It might be able to even have a conversation with you, maybe through some intermediary path. I always think about the interesting possibility of turning a box of soap into a service. So imagine, Karen, that you've got a mayonnaise stain on your blouse, and so you go to the net and you Google mayonnaise stain on my blouse. And it comes back and it says, well, do you have any of this kind of soap, washing machine soap at home? And you say, yes, I have this kind. And it says, do you have a washing machine? You said, yes. And it said, is it on the net? Yes. It said, okay, no problem. Just give us permission to connect to the washing machine. I'll set all the configuration required. You just toss the blouse in, put in a quarter cup of this soap, and I'll take care of the stain. So you just turned the box of soap into a service from the company that makes either the washing machine or the soap or both. But these ideas of allowing an expanded way for using devices that have become software enabled, I find a kind of helpful as I think about what the use cases should be. There's another thing that we ought to be concerned about, and that is that the device makers often are very focused on just the device that they're making. And they're not thinking too much about all the other devices that you might have acquired. And the idea that you could use multiple products and services as an ensemble to do something useful is pretty important. So The washing machine is part of a broader world. It needs soap and water and maybe other kinds of things to do its job. And if it's aware of that, it can be tracking usage, it can be placing orders, the usual scenarios that we all cook up that probably never actually happen. But they're things that help us imagine how these devices might interact with each other. And so we should be focused on the possibility that we need interoperability among them, and Karen has emphasized that well. In a sense, we're just going to another step in this internet evolution. In the early stages, it was just mostly information that we traded back and forth. We got access to computing resources remotely. Then the social media came along, and now we had much more use of the communication system for social interactions. And now, finally, as the Internet of Things comes along, we end up with a kind of physical graph of devices that are cooperating with each other in order to make our lives easier. At least that's the theory. So in order to make this work comfortably and effectively for all of us, there are at least three things we need to consider. One of them is making sure that we have control over the data that's produced, that we have the ability to exert access control, so we don't want random parties getting access to the devices that we're depending on. And we certainly want to make sure that there's a way to tell the device, only listen to the following authorized parties. That means we need strong identity management, we need strong authentication, so a device can refuse to take commands or to deliver data to unauthorized parties. We clearly need to have some interoperability, and as you'll see in another slide or two, if you don't have a kind of a uniform capacity to allow common interaction, you end up with a whole bunch of fragmented controllers scattered all around that you have to interact with independently. And finally, we need new kinds of interfaces to allow ease of interaction with these devices. I'm not sure whether talking to them is the right thing. I still have a picture in my head of walking up to the refrigerator and asking it if it has something in it, feeling funny about talking to a machine. On the other hand, I don't know how many of you use the Google Voice interfaces, but I know that I'm finding myself talking not through my mobile, but to my mobile. It's almost like giving your Roomba a name. Have you ever had people who buy these little electronic devices and they treat them like pets and they give them names and they talk to them? We used to invite people over to the house and we set the Roomba loose to roam around in the living room, and people would follow it around to see if it was going to get out from under the sofa. So, our interactions with these devices may become more like the interactions we have with people, but those are natural interactions, so we might get to the point where gestures and things like that might work. I don't want to spend too much time on the details here, but I can't help but emphasize the importance of being able to configure a device that knows who it's not supposed to talk to, or rather who it should talk to. And so we really need to emphasize that. The original internet design, by the way, had that model in mind. Basically, the idea was that anything could talk to anything else, and you could refuse if the thing that was trying to talk to you was not part of your list of valid interlocutors. And we kind of lost a little bit of that when firewalls came along. And people thought, well, I'll create this perimeter defense so that the perimeter will keep bad people from talking to my devices. The trouble is you can walk around that perimeter with an infected memory stick or an infected laptop. And the consequence of that is that the devices inside the perimeter were vulnerable because the perimeter defense wasn't adequate. And so in the Internet of Things, despite the fact that it's a little weird to imagine a light bulb defending itself against somebody trying to hack it, it may in fact turn out to be important that each of these devices have a very limited willingness to communicate and to accept control. The other thing I worry about is that if these devices have computers in them that are fairly capable. I mean, it's going to be hard to get a dumb chipset. Eventually, every chipset you get is going to be able to run Linux or something else. So the headline I worry about is 100,000 refrigerators attack Bank of America. And the problem here is not that the refrigerator was set out to do that. It's just that somebody managed to get in and infect it with more software than it was intended. And you might never even notice that because it's doing everything it's supposed to do as a refrigerator. It's just that it's got this other side job, which is attacking Bank of America or something else. So that's a big deal, and we have to make sure that we can deal with that. The interoperability should be obvious. I don't want to have 17 different hub controllers in the house that I have to learn to interact with, or worse, when I move into a new house, and it's got a whole complement of hubs I've never dealt with before. We have to find a way to make all this stuff interoperable. We've learned that lesson from the internet. We've learned that the IP protocol turned out to be a very useful thing because everybody knew how to do it. So I hope that we come to some conclusions about that. However, we have this problem, and this is an example of a variety of different communication protocols, not all of them at the same layer in the architecture, but just to emphasize how much diversity that there is. Somehow we are going to have to overcome the diversity. In the internet world, the way that was done is that we said the internet layer is what's common, and we're fine having a variety of things underneath supporting the packets. And we may have to come to similar kind of conclusions in the Internet of Things. So far, I think there's a fair amount of agreement that Internet protocol is an acceptable means of affecting end-to-end communication. But there's a lot of variation in the protocol stack above that, a lot of variation in configuration management and identity management and the like. So somewhere along the line, as companies race to produce products that you and I might buy, eventually we as the consumers may have to say, wait a minute, I really don't want all these different controllers and hubs and everything else. I need something that is in common so that I can manage my devices and they can cooperate with each other. But it may turn out that it's the consumers that have to push that rather than the companies that are trying to make products and services. I don't know how many of you are using mobiles right now to control some of these devices, but if you're like me, I'm getting a little tired of the 17 million apps that I have to search through in order to find the one that I need to control the heater or the air conditioner. So I think eventually we'll need to see a way of a more common kind of interface in the same sense that the browser is your uniform way of getting to the World Wide Web. We may need to have something that is a uniform way of getting to all the various devices that we want to have control over. I want you to, many of you I'm sure have already thought this through, but imagine you're at home, it's a residential scenario, and everybody in the house essentially has control over all the various devices. And then you have a guest come over. And it's not clear how much of the device complement you want the guest to have access to. And so now you have to figure out, how do I grant suitable access? And oh, by the way, after they leave, you don't want them to have remote access to all of the things that they reasonably had access to while they were a guest in your home. There are a whole series of ephemeral kinds of granting of access and control and information. I don't think any of us has really figured that out, although maybe some of the subsequent talks today will help us see where we are with that. There's another example, and Karen alluded to the fact that some information which seems innocuous is actually potentially hazardous. So a simple example of this is temperature information. I have a sensor network at home that samples temperature in every room in the house every 5 minutes, and it sends that data down to a server. At the end of the year, I have very good engineering data about how well or how poorly the heating and ventilation and air conditioning system work. But imagine for a moment that some bad person gets access to that sampled timeline data. They may derive from that knowledge of how many people live in the house, When do they come and go? What rooms do they typically end up in? And if you were planning to rob the house, that's very useful information. On the other hand, suppose the house is on fire and the fire department is on the way, and you may actually want them to get as much information as possible as they're coming, or if the police are coming because of a burglar alarm. And so there are these situations where you want some people to have access to the data for a certain period of time during a crisis, for example, but not outside of that. Figuring out how to make that work is part of the challenge of the Internet of Things. I mentioned or alluded to the fact that we may have different kinds of interfaces to these devices than the conventional keyboard, mice, and even mobile. At Google, we've been experimenting with fabrics that are essentially programmable. I mean, they have sensor materials built right into the fabric that you can touch, and it can sense which part, like you were touching things on your sleeve. There may be a variety of new kinds of interactions that we can have with these devices that are quite different from what we've been experienced in the past. So I think that we should probably divide our thinking up into just getting the hardware to interact with each other, and then the collection of software that sits on top of that interaction that actually supplies the real functionality of the Internet of Things. So we are very interested in the possibility of creating a kind of an experimental environment where a lot of these devices can be tested. I think that some of you have probably been to Disneyland in Orlando. Remember the experimental city of tomorrow, Epcot, E-P-C-O-T. I forget what the P stands. Experimental City of Tomorrow. Yeah, Progressive City of Tomorrow. Oh, close enough. So anyway, I mean, what I imagine is that for any of us who are interested in making devices like this, it would be fun to put them in a place where we could actually use them. It's almost tempting to imagine building a house full of this stuff and putting a family in there and seeing what happens. But the idea that we have to try this in real environments, I think, is pretty important, because if you just do this in a speculative way, you won't really know what life is like. So let me finish there by suggesting a couple of things. First of all, we want to maintain the powerful elements of the Internet, this permissionless innovation, which has given us all the opportunity to do the Internet of Things and other stuff, keeping it open and level playing field for all of the parties who are interacting. And second, I think we need to counter the natural desire of equipment makers to build their stuff and get it out into the market as fast as possible, and who cares if it doesn't interoperate with anything else. We all know that interoperability is an important element. And finally, we really have to pay attention to strong authentication and access control. Otherwise, this won't be a pleasant world to live in. It will be a scary world to live in, and that's not what any of us wants. So I'll stop there and thank you for your time, and I think I may have just given you some extra time for a coffee break if you like. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vint Cerf. I think we have actually time for questions and answers. We've had a great introduction of the challenges, issues and challenges from Karen Rose. And,
it's on.
Vint Cerf has gone ahead and broken that down for us in more detail with specifics, very thought-provoking. So we welcome your questions. Feel free to walk to the microphone, any of these microphones. This one.
They may all just want to go. I've got the microphone. I'll take care of this. Right. This is part of my shtick, is running around with a microphone.
How do you define open standards? How do you define the open standards? What is an open standard?
Well, it has a couple of components to it. One of them is that it is a consensus kind of standard, like the ones that are developed in the IETF. There's no limitation on getting access to the details of the standard. You aren't charged for it. It's completely open and accessible. Most open standards also have reference implementations that will help you actually build an instance of that standard. So those are at least the elements that I would include. Now, since you asked the question, Ken, what's your definition?
Well, for many people, an open standard is one that does not have a intellectual property cost. Of course, for the people who are good engineers and like to create intellectual property, that might be a standard that appears rather closed.
You're sitting here in a bunch of people who at least know something about the internet, and I assume you're part of that. Everybody here understands that you wouldn't have the internet that you have today if it weren't for the fact that we gave away the design on purpose without any limitation. And I think that's absolutely the fastest and best way to enable people to do new things, is to not put any barriers in their way. So that's my preference for open standards, is no limits. Okay, question back here. Stand up if you like.
First, thank you.
Hold on to the microphone.
First, thank you for all that you've done. I'd like to ask a specific question about point 3. Tim Cook has recently put a letter up about the issues of letting the FBI sort of do a backdoor to the iPhone, and iPhones are things on the Internet of Things, and I don't know how to think about this. Do you have ideas about sort of the issue involved and how we should think about it? Should we support Tim Cook? Should we supporting the FBI seems like not the right answer to me, but I just don't know how to think about this.
I think Tim is taking the right position on this. I think that it is unacceptable that the government could demand that an organization build what in effect would be a backdoor into the system. Once you demonstrate it's possible to do that, once you create tools, they leak. And so anyone who talks about backdoors and escrowed keys and everything else really worries me a lot. And I tried to emphasize the fact that these devices have to be able to resist being accessed by anybody who isn't authorized to do so by the party who owns the device, who's in control. That's you. And so you're driving unless you're driving a John Deere tractor, that's right. So I really feel very strongly that we cannot afford to have a society in which the government can make a demand of that type and expect us to accept it. So I am hoping that Tim will be successful in his effort. I had another hand here and then one in the back.
Thank you. My question was kind of similar to what he asked on terms of privacy. So right now, data that is being scooped up from various devices lands globally far away from where we are physically. So what are your thoughts on keeping data local and guarding that within a local perimeter? So my question was mainly on what are your thoughts about privacy in terms of keeping data local within the fixed perimeter of a person where he physically is, as opposed to giving it all the way out to the internet.
Well, first of all, there shouldn't be any reason why your data goes anywhere unless you want it to go somewhere. You might decide that somebody could help analyze the information from some of the devices that you keep at home, but it should be your decision to do that. Now, there have been arguments about in the power companies, for example, if they put in devices to help you keep track of how much energy you used and which devices at home consume the energy, which is good feedback for you. Maybe you get the bill and you say, okay, so I used up X number of kilowatts this last month, but I don't know what I did. If you get the information that tells you, you might change your behavior patterns. But that's your data, in my opinion. That's not somebody else's data. You're the consumer of the data. Once you get the electrons, it's up to you what you did with them. Now, it's fair to say that some people are telling me that every device you have in the house that consumes electricity actually has a kind of signature. It's not a digital signature, but it's a consumption pattern, which might make it identifiable. And so it could be that if you could actually just watch the line, you could actually figure out which devices are on and how long are they on and so on. But to the specific question is, that's your data, in my opinion, not somebody else's, and you should have control over that. which is why crypto is turning out to be a pretty important element in this society. Once we're so digital, we really need to have all the protection that we can possibly have. I get this nice lady back here, and then I think I saw David's hand up.
Thank you. It's great to see you, Dr. Vint Cerf, and also it's just so exciting to always hear your next visionary thoughts and ideas. And so my question today is, you talked about sort of an idea or a dream that maybe a room could be built, a living room or a house with all of these devices and new configurations, and then just put a family, a guinea pig family in there. Are there any plans that you know of where that is a lab that's going to be happening?
So the answer is almost, by the way, everybody should be very concerned about the distinction between vision and hallucination, and sometimes, so be careful about this. At NIST, the National Institutes for Standards and Technology built a house on the Gaithersburg campus and instrumented it. I don't think they actually stuck a family in there to instrument them too, but the idea was to put the house together with a lot of devices that could measure how the house was being used. And I think that they may, here I'm speculating, I think they may actually have had people living there for a week or something like that in order to see what they could tell about the way in which the house's facilities were used. So the answer is maybe somebody will actually do that. I think it would be interesting, but I would prefer that all the data be private. Okay, let's get David, and then I saw some other hands over there. Yeah.
Okay, so now we're measuring everything all the time, right? So I'd say pretty soon it's going to be possible for somebody who aggregates the data that I generate to actually simulate me, okay? And somehow then if somebody can simulate me, that's not okay. I mean, only I have the right to simulate me, I think. So the question is, how do we manage this with sort of the ownership of data? Because even if I sign up for a service, even if I sign this long legal contract that I never have time to read, I mean, it's spilling out there. How do we stop that?
Well, the simple answer is I don't know. And one question is, we have this problem already, right? To the extent that username and password is you, and somebody gets your username and password, they are effectively simulating you. So your question, David, is actually an extension of that into a slightly more complex realm. And so the question is, how do you assure that the world or the systems you're dealing with know it's you and not somebody pretending to be you, is a continuing tough problem. And if you talk about biometrics, I get really worried about that, because I'm not a big fan of using biometrics to do identification for the following simple reason. You think I should go up there, Carla? I'm getting directions from my chief of staff. Oh, stop. Oh. Okay. Does that say stop or pots? I'm dyslexic. Thank you. There we go. Okay. Well, so David, the problem has been with us for a while, and it's still there. And I'm sorry I couldn't get to the other questions. But thanks again.